My name is Matthew Seals, and better known as Matt Fox, and this is the first of a series called Fly on the Wall. And Fly on the Wall is an idea where I was thinking about pivotal moments in Cayman and trying to figure out, I was truthfully just wondering like what those conversations were like. And I said, boy, I would love to have been a fly on the wall and heard that conversation. And the idea kind of came from that, and it was about finding Caymanians, residents, people who are leaders within Cayman, and visionary people who are either shaping Cayman or have shaped the Cayman to what it is today. And it's about the history of Cayman and kind of figuring out where we've been and where we're going to. And in addition to that, it's also about taking the opportunity to peel back some of those layers and get to know the people. So obviously I have my first guest here today, who is Emily DeCou.
That's correct, yes.
And you're better known as Em.
M, yes.
Yeah. And as far as I know, you're an advocate for environmental sustainability. You're also let me get this right now, oh man, why is it whenever you're like, you've got all of the thoughts in your head and you're like, it's gone. Well, probably the biggest one is you're a political hopeful for Georgetown East, and you were also doing some work as where is it going? Not a clue. Maybe I should ask you.
Yeah.
So tell us a bit about yourself.
I mean, that is a fairly accurate introduction. I would say at the end of the day, I just love the planet that we all call home. I love this country that we cherish, that's so beloved to us, and to me I see cause has an effect, and we all should do our part. When we know better, we do better to take care of what it is that we love. So I like to get people to think about, what is it about Cayman that you love in particular. Some people will say maybe it's the safety of my family being here, or just the ability to go down to the sea, have some sea water if you're feeling kind of under the weather, or our tropical fruits, or just how verdant it is, or how close-knit as a community we are. You know, these are things that we need to protect if we love them. And so where I come in, and I try to come in, is to just sort of help people in a bespoke way to achieve that goal of protecting what it is that they love. At the end of the day, we can all sort of agree that we love Cayman. We love our culture. We love our heritage. And it isn't something that we should be a bystander in seeing that thing that we love be protected. We are active participants in our country, and that's where I try to help people, because there's no one-size-fits-all thing when it comes to either adopting more sustainable habits, whether you're a business owner or an individual, right? So I spent about 10 years in the financial services industry, and towards the end of my career, I realized like the thing that I love is not what I'm going to work and doing every day. Like, I loved doing the work for my clients, but the work that my clients were doing was not really conducive to the longevity of coastal islands like ourselves, which are going to be really susceptible to sea level rise, right?
Interesting.
So a lot of investment funds, they have sort of very carbon intensive operations globally, that it's essentially like I'm working towards the demise of the thing that I love, right? So I ran in 2021 as a candidate for Georgetown East, and had always been really environmentally minded, but not in a, oh yay, hugging trees kind of way, more in a just, plants give us life. They give us the oxygen we breathe. They give us shade. There are crops. There are bush medicine, right? It's our culture. And working with your hands in a garden is such a, dare I say it, primal thing to do. I've had a garden since I was in my teenage years.
Yeah.
And
It's very rewarding as well, right? When you work with your hands and you grow something and then you get to eat the fruits of your labor, literally. Yeah.
I remember I had a little herb garden, and very well seasoned food was made in my house when I had my garden.
And I'm sure you could say something that you grew always tastes better than if you bought it from the grocery store, right? So tell us a bit about your background as a Caymanian as well. People probably are saying, well, I don't recognize your name. So who are you from?
DeCou throws off a lot of people, admittedly. I accept that, right? It's a French-Belgian name. Obviously got it from my daddy. But my daddy, his mother in the early 70s married a Caymanian, a Yates from Savannah. So he was a maritime engineer that was traveling through Texas, if I'm not mistaken. And they met, had my aunt, and so that sort of started my dad's connection to the Cayman Islands from a very young age. And when he graduated high school, he was a police officer in the States for a little bit. And I think he just came here on vacation, realized that the RCIPS was hiring. Dad, please don't be mad at me if I'm misquoting that. But he eventually moved here, became a police officer. And like a lot of people's parents, met my mom in a bar, and they started their family very shortly thereafter. So I'm the younger sister of an amazing brother. My brother is one of my heroes. He's just an incredible person. And I followed 15 months after my brother. And my dad worked in the RCIPS for about 10 years. My mama is Bea. I am a Bea. I have like lost count of the number of generations, so I just say I'm 717 generation.
Right.
And yes, you might notice my accent kind of coming in and out.
Yep.
It is what it is. I don't have any explanation for it. It's just one of those things.
Are there any family experiences that have kind of shaped you as a Caymanian as well that you can remember?
Definitely. So my dad being a police officer, working in law enforcement, definitely shaped how I am as a person, very justice driven. Growing up, right was right, wrong is wrong, actions have consequences. My mom is an accountant. But that being said, whenever she has spare time on the weekends to take us, my brother and I out, we would do volunteer work, whether it was with Meals on Wheels, Cayman Hospice Care. We would do roadside cleanups when there wasn't a roadside cleanup. Those come to mind. Walking
That's
dogs
awesome.
at the Humane Society. So it was always about giving back and pouring back into the community and teaching us from a very young age, like you should always do your best to help those who may be less fortunate than you and do unto others, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So my dad, after leaving the RCIPS, he actually ended up working at the DOE Marine Conservation Unit.
Okay.
So sometimes he would pick my brother and I up from school, and we'd be like, how rude.
It's so funny, right? Because the whole time we were here prior to starting to record, not one chicken, not one rooster, and then all of a sudden they're here making their presence known. Right. But that's nothing more classic than Cayman.
Okay. We'll put you in there.
Oh, yeah, I gotta make sure you got their names.
Yeah, right. But I would say, like I was saying, my dad would pick my brother and I up from Triple C and be like, all right, we're going down to the dock. And then until sun went down, we were back out on the water with Daddy, whether it was going to Stingray City or just patrolling the waterfront. We never saw action, so to speak.
Yeah.
It wasn't like the movies or anything. But if there was a case of, we pulled up on like maybe somebody who might be poaching or something, it would be like, all right, guys, go down in the cabin. And
Right. So
Dad's gonna take care of this.
Again, so from a very early age, you were being almost like taught what is appropriate for Cayman's culture in terms of considering the longevity and doing things at the right time. I don't know if I got any footage of it, but we found a conch and you put it back in the ocean.
Yeah.
And it reminded me though, because I've grown up in North Side, so you got my own conch. But one of the things that was important to me was adhering to the laws and making sure that it's sustainable, not just for me, but my girls when they grow up, and making sure that they could get their conch when they have the season to get it too.
Exactly. It's all about being responsible, right?
Yeah. So you also had you've had your career in finance. You also do photography as a hobby. So where did that come from?
I've always been really interested in photography. I have some memories of my mom going to get her film developed and opening the envelope, and it'd be like half just pictures of random things and not the things that she thought she was photographing, and wondering why her film ran out so quick. So from a very early age, I was playing with my mom's film camera, and then I got given my first little digital point and shoot at 11 or 12 for Christmas. And it was a big hobby of mine. And then, I left finance. I'm still a sustainability consultant.
Okay.
I had...
And if you don't mind, feel free to expound on that as well. What does it mean to be a sustainability consultant? What does that do for businesses?
Sure. So I'm actually a total resource use and deficiency advisor, which is a really long title, but it's acronymized to TRUE, TRUE. So after I left the financial services industry, I recognized I had to do something that aligned more with my values. I really wanted to do my part to serve my community, and not just serve my community in a short-term way, but in a long-term way. And have things done that had, you know, ripple effects for generations to come. So we've made a lot of changes in Cayman in such a short period of time that are going to have effects on generations to come that are not necessarily the most positive. So I wanted to do the opposite and kind of counterbalance that, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
So I'm very passionate about zero waste. And so I was looking up, you know, different qualifications of how to become a zero waste consultant. And I came across the Total Resource Use and Efficiency Advisor qualification. I was like, sign me up. And I signed up, paid the fee, did the studying, did my exams, passed. And I'm very proud to say I'm the first and potentially still only Caymanian who is a Total Resource Use and Efficiency Advisor. So what that essentially translates to from a business and an organizational standpoint is helping businesses and organizations transition to more resource efficient operations. So from a manufacturing and production perspective, but also from your building operations. Like, are you using a lot more water than you should be? Are you throwing away things that you could be getting rebates on? Are you maybe disposing of things that could go back into the earth, whether it's like compost, like food scraps, that kind of thing, or are you just generating a lot of waste? So it's trying to find how waste can be diverted, how businesses can run more efficiently, and not just from the four walls of the business, but what are they doing as an operation? How can that be done more sustainably and efficiently?
And I could see how that could be really efficient or important for Cayman because we're a import-dependent country, right? So what happens if we end up in a situation where we have no access to those resources? So by having set up some of those companies in a position where they no longer require maybe some of the resources that they had to import, but they could actually sustain themselves locally without the added expense or without having to source it because it's no longer available kind of situation, you've made them more efficient as businesses as well. So that's really smart in one aspect as well, especially considering like Cayman as its own unique place, you know, as different. And I appreciate that. Yeah. So when you're not working on the campaign now, like how do you spend your time? Like
What time? No,
do you have favorite local spots?
I do. Yeah. I would consider my happy place to be Eden Rock. I love to free dive at Eden Rock. I'm hoping to eventually get into underwater photography because every time I go swimming, I see something amazing that I'm just like, is anybody going to believe me that I just saw 5 barracudas swimming together at once? Yes, chances are they will, but I could have gotten that on film.
Yeah.
I'll get there. In fact, your little thing that you're filming with, they have an underwater case for that. And I'm thinking,
really?
Yeah. So it has like a dome so that the head can pivot around.
No kidding.
Yeah.
I did not know that. That's pretty interesting.
So
Yeah.
It's I'm asking Santa for that this year. Apart from that, I love nature-based photography on land. So I love to just go hiking. And I was recently at Malporta's Pond in Northside.
Yep.
And my phone background is a photo that I took there. You know, it was so calming. And I went and I wasn't having a really great like mental day, to be honest, in all transparency. I had a lot of jumbled thoughts. So I was just like, I need to go for a drive. I need to touch grass. I need to go out and see some green, get off my screens. And that did the trick.
Well, as a Northside native, 100% the best district to check because, in my opinion, I am definitely biased. Definitely can appreciate Malport as being one of the stops. Yeah.
I also love the Botanic Park.
Yeah.
You're guaranteed to see you're almost guaranteed to see a blue iguana, Cayman parrots and birds of all kinds and different flora. It's colorful, it's quiet, it's peaceful, you know, and you're crossing paths with other people who are like, this is the vibe.
Yeah. Yeah. And as a local too, I don't know if we get enough locals passing through those locations, but I find oftentimes when I do it, because I'll just randomly pop up in one of those locations and you'll bump into tourists and oh, you're from Cayman, and you get to tell them your experience about being from Cayman and how important these places are to you. So I don't know if you've shared any of those similar experiences.
I remember one time I was just on the Mastic Trail and a group of tourists were coming up behind me and I was trying to film myself like exploring and trying to inspire other people to come out and enjoy this little spot. And they were like, do you know anything about the plants and stuff? And I was like, oh, do I? Do you have the time? And unfortunately it started raining and I was like, all right, we're not trying to catch ourselves under a manchineel. So let's
That is
cook
a
it,
good
cook
point.
it
Yeah.
back to the trailhead. But it was wonderful because it was like you could have heard a pin drop. They were so fascinated by how some of the trees around us are habitat and food sources for our endemic species, and how when we got to the part where there are mangroves, understanding what the mangroves do for Cayman, not
Yeah.
only from a storm resilience perspective, climate crisis combating perspective, but also from a cultural and a heritage perspective, because not a lot of people know this. And I'll share a fun fact is, if you're familiar with the area of Barkus in West Bay, it got its name from the yesteryear industry stripping the bark off of red mangroves to extract the dye to export it to other countries.
And that would be the red logwood?
The red mangrove.
Red mangrove. Okay.
So the people who did that bark stripping were referred to as barkers.
Okay.
And Barkers has a lot of red mangroves, so the area just got the name. So yeah.
Okay.
So you kind of diving into the next area that I wanted to talk to you about, which is your advocacy. And so what inspired you to take that deep role in the community and advocacy about this kind of stuff? Like, if you could boil it down to maybe one point, what would that have been, the defining moment to do that?
I remember we were reaching the last election and feeling like my generation and those to come were not being adequately represented from a policymaker perspective, and that's what compelled me to run. I knew better, and I felt surely the big smart people in government should be doing better because they've got all the information, they've got all the scientists, they've got all these departments, but it wasn't happening. And I won't focus too much on that, but I said, if not me, who? If not now, when?
Yeah.
And I just went for it. And it ended up inspiring people to go into that field and explore more about their culture and what they can do to protect it. They fell in love with it, right? It's something that needs to be stewarded and cared for, and it's been pretty second nature to me in my life. Growing up, I spent a lot of time after school with my grandma and my great-grandmother from West Bay, hearing their stories of, bush medicine being the cure-all for whatever ailments they had. And the reason I actually became a zero waste advisor and a sustainability consultant is because of my grandmother, right? I remember she told me this story about, well, it's not a story, but she was telling me about her childhood and how back in the day, they didn't throw anything away. The food scraps went to the chickens, or a can was reused as a cup.
Yep.
Everything was reused. Barely anything went to waste. They didn't have a landfill back in those days, but a couple times a year, the community would come together and they would dig a pit in the ground and they would put the things that they absolutely could not reuse or recycle or reduce. And they would set it on fire, put a metal pot over it, and it would just turn to ash and they would cover it up. But that's like a couple times a year. That's how they were taking care of their waste. And, I just was like, I romanticized that moment, I guess you could say, and was just like, that's the dream. We can see this growing landfill is not doing anything for our physical health, like from a public health perspective. It's not taking care of our environment. It's not really cultural. And it's where I try to gently lead people to the direction of sending less to landfill, reducing their operating costs, and seeing how long-term this contributes to what you say, which is surely the Cayman Islands, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
What's interesting about where you mentioned Caymanians are basically using everything to where they could no longer use it. I remember someone telling me that Cayman went through different phases as well. And as most would know, but if they don't know, Cayman had severely difficult times where they didn't know where the next meal was coming from. And a lot of times they found themselves also scavenging from shipwrecks and different things. So I think this is also akin to the times when Cayman gained an appreciation for those times of drought, and they actually could use those to grow their sustainability base back in those days as well. And everybody loves Cayman style beef, but they may not realize that the method of cooking it actually came from an idea of preserving it using the oil layer to ensure that it could last longer over the Christmas period or the periods to make sure they could keep eating over the holiday period, because they had no refrigeration, they had no ice, and that's really remarkable about the Caymanian people and how resourceful they would have become for those moments of need and desperation in some instances as well.
I'm really glad you used that word resourceful, because resourcefulness is really what I'm all about, right?
Okay.
We have all these beautiful natural resources around us, but we have also got a community, which is a resource that needs to be responsibly invested into, so people understand the reciprocal nature of serving our community. It gives us everything we need and asks for nothing in return except that we protect it.
Yeah. So just trying kind of keeping with the topic of your leadership and so on, I remember reading that you were also president of the Colors Caribbean. And what were some of the key initiatives that you worked on while you were involved with that as well?
Yeah, so I was the president of Colors Caribbean in 23 till about 24. And while I was there, we had a youth center that we had for anybody to come. It wasn't like you have to meet a certain criteria.
Yep.
At the end of the day, we should all be allies,
Yep.
and all should be taking care of our vulnerable and safeguarding our society regardless of how they identify,
Yep.
right? But this was unique to Cayman, and it was an honor to be able to give young people a safe place that they could go regularly and build community and just do things that weren't sort of coming at it from the perspective of like your identity is the focus. Like, you are more than that. You're creative. You love movies. You like to do puzzles. You like to chat. You have homework. You got stresses at school. Like, it's a safe place.
How do you see Cayman becoming even more united and inclusive in its everyday life?
Yeah, I mean, I think it starts with just having constructive dialogue with people. I recognize, and many people recognize, that there is a part of our community that they have myths in their head, and they just need to be compassionately reassured that how somebody enjoys their life is really not your business, right? Like, these are human beings.
Yep.
How they identify is their least interesting feature. I
Yep.
promise you that. I promise you, it's the fact that they're maybe a doctor or a lawyer, or they have a family, or maybe they come from some really cool country or something, or they have a really cool hobby, or, those are more interesting and what we should be caring about. And they're people too. They have health that needs to be taken care of, and they're just existing. They're respectfully, keep this on if you want, but don't flatter yourself. Like, nobody is trying to make your life miserable. They're just existing, and they're part of our society. They're our brothers, our brethren, our sisters, our children, our parents, and it's really near and dear to my heart that we get to that point in our society where it's like, what do you mean you thought that way at one point? Like, I really want to see that in our lifetimes, because it's a social injustice that really needs to be worked through, because it really is not productive.
Well, I can openly say with you, I've had some of my own eye-opening moments, and I've grown as an individual. And it comes from partially the way I was raised and the culture I was brought up in, but by exposing myself to cultures and people from different walks of life, I've gained an appreciation, and I've learned to be more compassionate and accepting. And I think if all of us take those steps in that direction, we're off in the right direction. We started to talk about, you've already mentioned that, and we've talked about you running for this election period, 2025, but and you mentioned you'd run in 2021 as well. But what was the catalyst for this time around? What made you say, let me give it another shot, and why? I have a feeling that what we just talked about is partially part of it, about your importance of the community and the people, and preserving both their own respects.
Yeah, so I mean, 2025 journey is really just a continuation of what I started in 2021. And it's really important to me that we collectively as a country work to develop a fair Cayman Islands. So it's one where people are not making really tough decisions that they don't have to be, despite contributing so much to society, or are young people feeling hopeless and lack of a sense of belonging in this country where this is your home, right? And so in 2025, I saw that after 4 years, I saw that there was simultaneously movement in the right direction, but still that overarching status quo trying to shift us back and derail the train, so to speak. And in the end of October last year, when Andre Ebanks, Catherine Ebanks-Wilkes, Heather Bodden, and Sabrina Turner resigned, I didn't think I could respect these individuals more, but seeing how they stood up and they stood on principle that like, we will not be complicit.
Stood on business.
They stood on business. Like, they were like, enough is enough. I don't mean to sound cliche at this point, but really and truly, enough was enough. Like, these individuals that they were working with who claim they come from these backgrounds where they can contribute all this to the development of their community, it's not translating, with all due respect, right? How are we better off financially? We've got accountants. How are we better off a more just society? We've got all these lawyers. And so for them to step back and say, we would rather stand on the opposition and be able to assert, not be aggressive, but to be assertive. Like, these are our non-negotiables. Our people come first. Our community comes first. And it lit something within me that was like, look, I knew I was running again, but now I know who I'm running with.
Right. So they aligned with your values and who you were.
That's awesome.
And when talking about the things that are close to me and close to other young people and what I see the future generations are going to need, having these discussions, it's actually a constructive conversation. We're both teaching each other different things, and they can see where my vision is, I can see where theirs is, and we can meet in the middle. We can have a respectful dialogue. That's really, really a rare quality, in most professions.
And what sorts of lessons do you think you're taking from your last run in 2021 into this election season as well?
Well, in 2021, I was still working in corporate.
Okay.
I thought, surely I can blend the two. Whereas now I'm like, nope, full on, full-time advocacy work.
Right.
It's standing on business, I guess you could say. Right? Like, we have so much to lose, and it's really not that complicated for people to be inspired once they know better to do better. In my humblest of opinions. And that's why education is really important to me. I remember growing up, both of my parents took it very seriously that my brother and I had a solid education, because it was the one thing that people couldn't take away from us. And it's served me well, and it continues to. And I'm a lifelong learner. I love doing workshops and traveling and going to conferences and learning about what different regional island neighbors are experiencing. But interestingly enough, there's a lot of parallels in the challenges they face that we face as well. So that solidarity with other islands has really seen my advocacy work blossom, and I'm just full-time, full-on serious. That's all I care about, is just the longevity of this country.
Yeah, absolutely.
What do you think are some of the issues that specifically like Georgetown East faces at the moment?
I would say one of the biggest issues, Georgetown East in particular, is the lack of balanced development because of the South Sound Basin. It's been developed unsustainably, and it's causing flooding in places that didn't flood before, which leads to some health problems. If you get mold in your house, it leads to decreased property values, increased home insurance, property insurance premiums, right? And at the end of the day, it's also, our beaches are eroding because of structures being constructed too close to the water, which is our culture, it's our heritage. Going fishing in, like, we can't catch no fish.
Right.
And the reasons behind that development, you can't sugarcoat it, right? There's just been a unplanned population growth, right? Emphasis on unplanned. We have not actually mapped out as a nation, what do we want our country to look like in the next 5, 10 years, let alone the next 2 to 3, or 1 to 4 as a term, right? Like, we have not taken the time as a country to say, where do we want our early childhood education centers? Do we want to say they're every half mile or every, do we need a fire station and these essential services and goods, being provided regularly so people aren't so car dependent? We haven't taken the time to say, we are going to come together and see what a comprehensive public transportation system looks like for Cayman. That's another issue that Georgetown East struggles with, is the lack of really and truly good public transportation.
Yeah.
So what does like a holistic development plan look like if you envisioned it, and how would you put it forth?
Well, I think about this a lot. And I am but one person, and I know it starts with having the community come together and saying, these are our needs. We respect that people have wants, but we need to meet our needs first before we focus on the wants of the few. Like, what are the needs of the many? Get that dealt with, And then we can think about the wants of the few based on the profits and all this stuff. So we have a lot of smart minds. Like there's no shortage of solution finders in this country. And it's about bringing those minds together with this common goal of seeing our country be efficient and seeing people's cost of living go down because we're doing things more efficiently. If everybody didn't have to get a car with insurance, have to lose time in case they're late to work because they got a flat tire, or have more quality time with their family because they're not waking up at, before the sun rises, that kind of thing. Like, I mean, that's not so much a Georgetown East thing, but in our eastern districts, that's a huge issue. But thinking as well, like how things were done back in the day, right? I think it's really maybe adorable isn't the most adult way to describe it, but the Savannah schoolhouse, right?
Mm-hmm.
It may be not practical in today's times where you have students across different grades where there's only like 15 can fit in the classroom, but imagine if we had one of those every quarter mile or every half mile, and contextualized to Cayman education system and curriculum where we're focusing on our heritage, we're focusing on our culture, we're instilling life skills in our children and in our students, and then we figure out what they can do to contribute to society, whether it's working with their hands, maybe they're more academically minded, versus just saying pretty much as we have been doing, become an accountant, become a lawyer, or become a doctor, right? And just having a more diverse education system that is also inclusive, right? Because we have students and children and people in our community who have different learning needs, and we need to make sure that everybody is able to get access to the quality education that they need, right? Like, I look at it almost like healthcare, where no patient's the same. A doctor is taught how to treat their patient, but they have to recognize that no two patients are the same, so they have to tailor their treatment, right? And it's the same with children, you know?
So, since we're solving like the world's problems today, right?
We're gonna find
what would you say about like traffic and transportation? I live in Savannah. I spend about an hour in traffic every single day. How do you see Cayman transforming to a point where it's sustainable to continue the way we're going? How do we make it work? How do we reduce traffic and make transportation not so anger-inducing for everyone?
It's a great question, and one that I've thought about a lot. We are a very unique country, right? Like, we don't necessarily have blocks. So we don't have a sort of city grid layout. I'm not proposing that. I would say definitely we need to start with some better public transport. Something that's much more reliable, more modern, efficient, safe. That way, if you're taking off, say, 5,000 cars off the road because 5,000 people are taking public transport, your Savannah commute might only take 20 minutes on each end, because that's just the distance it takes to cross. There's an app that you can use, and on top of that, right, we have, as we all know, when school breaks come, there's no traffic. It's a breeze most days to work.
I know very well.
So let's look at making buses more mandatory for all the schools, right? Maybe we add a congestion fee to certain school licenses. If a certain percentage of their students aren't using the school bus, they get a congestion fee. So that incentivizes
and disincentivizes
cars. We need to make Cayman a lot less car-centric, because honestly, cars emit so much carbon, and it's just making, I don't know about you, but it is hot. It is only March, right? And that is scary. It's only 2025. Like, we have an infinite number of years to come, and it's just wild to think about it getting hotter. So something I'm really passionate about is making our communities more walkable as well. So perhaps you don't need to travel so far to work, making our services more efficient so that you can maybe do more remote work, or you have staggered working hours. Work with two employees are the same, right? Similarly to students and patients in healthcare, right? So at the end of the day, if the work gets done, the work gets done when it gets done. If it's really dependent on a person coming in 9 to 5, like, maybe you need to revisit your business model, because that's a little volatile, in all honesty. So I would say buses, making our communities more walkable, so that feeds into the development plan. Is how do we want our communities to look? What services do we need? Some communities need more of certain things, so we have to look at it nationally.
Yeah.
One of the things I often think about, in December, I was picking up my mother from the airport, and I'm driving around and around and around because the short-term parking is full. And I noticed the other parking lot was also full, but it was filled with employees. And it reminded me, when you go to the Miami airport and other airports, what do you see quite often? A transport vehicle dropping employees off. And I said to myself, I was like, that parking lot could be more easily accessible if we change the way we think. And I think that's a lot of what we need to consider at these times, where Cayman is getting bigger, the population continues to grow. And if we continue to say the same things every time, we're going to get the same result every single time. And yes, it means maybe you have to take a bus that takes 5 minutes to get you to your workplace at the airport. But it also means it's a better experience for everybody across the board. And if we took more of those approaches, it would mean that there are less frustrations for everybody across the board as well.
Totally.
How do you see tourism and finance, beyond tourism and finance, what other opportunities do you see kind of being earmarked for Cayman's potential growth and economy?
That's a great question, because I think about diversifying our economy a lot too, right? I've come to meet a lot of young Caymanians who are very passionate about talking about Cayman and showing people who come here what Cayman is all about, whether it's their little pocket of Malportis or Eden Rock or some other iconic location. That's a job that someone could do. So I'm really passionate about investing more in sustainable tourism, however that looks for the person who wants to essentially market our country to someone who's visiting, right? When it comes to the financial services industry, it's quite a complex thing. I would say I'm not sure we have the time to talk about it in depth, how we diversify that to where it's a bit more sustainable long term. But there are principles of responsible and ethical investment. It's not like our regulator doesn't want to see these principles be implemented, right? SEMA has published a report that explains how our investors, people who invest in Cayman, can do so in a more sustainable way long term. And it's really the political will of government to say, we need to choose our hard. It's hard to have a conversation with investors about what they can and cannot do with their money and how much profit they can make and what their return on investment looks like from a financial statements perspective. But also it's hard to, in my opinion, look at young Caymanians and say, I am not doing enough to make sure that you can afford to live in your own country. And so it's about choosing our hard. And I think that that's really what it's going to come down to, particularly for the next 4 years. Because I mean, 2025 to 2029, in 2030, we have an international obligation to protect 30% by 2030. 30% of our land. And currently we have about 50% of our seas protected under marine park legislation. But we have a woeful amount of land conserved and protected that is earmarked to be not developed, right? We're still not doing so hot when it comes to, meeting the requirements of the National Energy Policy. If I'm not mistaken, we should have attained 70% renewable energy by 2030, and I believe we're still at less than 5%.
Well, I'm a king of procrastination, so I can understand that sentiment and maybe where I got it from too. But I'm not in agreement with it. But yeah, I definitely feel that. Yeah, it's something we need to address.
Someone else's problem to deal with. We can't, coming full circle to what I was saying at the start of the interview or at the start of our talk, we can't be bystanders in this. When we know better, we gotta do better.
We have to hold ourselves accountable, and that's something I've been saying for some time.
If you don't know, there are so many smart people on this island and in this country that do know, or you can upskill your knowledge to where you do know how to blend maybe your 20 plus years in the legal sector with policy making that's, ecological and community centered.
One of the things I think I wanted to ask you as well on the topic of roles and growth in the Cayman's economy, do you see any potential industries, or talk about flies on the wall and I got a fly attacking me. How do you see young Caymanians or people in general Is there any industries that are emerging that Cayman hasn't potentially looked at that we could consider? A wild question out there, because these are things that Cayman should consider if we're thinking about moving things to more a conservative nature, whether it's talking about our cruise port issues and preserving our nature that's there. We also need to consider what other industries are opportunities for Caymanians and people who live in, who need to make a meaningful gain from what they do. Do you see any opportunities? Have you explored any that you think that would be good for Caymanians and people?
As you can probably tell by the smile on my face, yes.
Yeah.
Growing up, my great-grandmother, she was a master thatch artisan, and I just remember thinking, I would love to do that when I grow up. Like, she could make a hat in a weekend, a croquet sack in a week, like a big ground basket, right? And unfortunately, a lot of her wares were lost to Hurricane Ivan. She eventually developed dementia, so her ability to teach me and her other great-grandchildren was lost. But it sounds simple, but sometimes less is more. And being humble and taking pride in the fact that we are the only country in the world that grows a silver thatch palm is something to be proud of. But you need land, you need rainfall for the trees to grow, and it's a product. It serves multiple purposes. I actually have a ground basket as a handbag. Very multifunctional. Sometimes if I forget.
And it was one of our national exports.
Exactly, right? So it's not, I think, about recreating the wheel or thinking we have to scratch our heads too much to figure out what new industry. I think maybe looking to the past. We have a lot of creative people in Cayman, a lot of creative young people who like to work with natural ingredients and produce things. And if this might sound radical, but something I thought about is what if we implemented a policy where if somebody can make it locally, we don't import it? Or if somebody could grow it locally, we don't import it.
Right.
And we just as a people get more used to eating seasonally, taking pride in like our the things that we send tourists home with, like it was made here by things that were grown here or found here, versus a T-shirt that was screen printed in China, as an example. And not to be offensive to people from China, it's not Caymanian.
No, and we need products that are made and kind of designed in Cayman. And when I travel, I try to take something from Cayman with me, and nothing would make me more proud to say this was made by people from Cayman and it was actually derived from Cayman as well. So I totally can understand that sentiment.
Yeah.
Do you see any other opportunities for like the modernization of education? You mentioned before considering different ways of thinking about doing it. Do you see anything that can be done there?
For me, I think it's really important that our students understand the culture and the heritage of the Cayman Islands. It's a no-brainer that our students should have life skills, and there's a fractured way of our curriculums in Cayman having those subjects. Some schools have them, some don't, and that's not fair. I mean, what outcomes does that lead to, right? We need to recognize where we are as a country and where we want to go, lean on where we've been, take those lessons learned and say, we want our people to be healthy and safe. And what does that look like? It means teaching them about how to take care of their community, how to take care of themselves, not only their body, but their minds, and taking care of themselves and taking care of their communities so that they can actually thrive and give back to them. And it's just a cyclical thing. So I've, in 2021, proposed the idea of creating life skills and culture curriculum that grows with students. So from time they're little ones, they're learning about what makes Cayman unique until they're graduating college at a tertiary level. They're able to dive or make a fishing net, these types of things that make Cayman unique and could potentially set them up financially as a career professionally long term. So that's one thing. I'm really passionate about inclusive education and making sure that children and students with disabilities are included. An inclusive society improves everybody's quality of life and opens our minds, right? Some of my favorite people, like my brother included, have disabilities, and it's just their least interesting feature once more. It's just a component of their
Yeah.
existence. It's nothing to be, how dare I say it, like it's not a problem to solve. It's a solution that we all can come together and unite and say, these are still our community and we need to take care of them. Right?
Something that I've been a huge kind of, it's been one of the recurring topics, and you kind of touched on it for me, is about reminding people that everyone is human, and there are people who are different, but at the same time, it doesn't change the fact that they're still humans and they all carry their own unique traits. And sometimes that makes them maybe not so great at one thing, but amazing at other things. And you're right. I think that appreciation for that is a big thing. It's getting a little bit late, so I don't want to take up too much more of your time. So gotta ask the pageant question is, if elected, what would be one of the first things that you would try and change within your election year?
First thing, right off the bat, get that national development plan worked out, right? Because that touches on so many different areas and it doesn't just focus on one constituency. That's a national plan. And it's not something that we would need to recreate the wheel on. Like, there are other countries that have done these. There are so many bright minds and consultants and scientists in our community that can shape this, who have that proactive way of thinking and who have that way of understanding that we have an obligation as a society to safeguard our vulnerable, right? Not just our young people, not our communities of people with disabilities, our elderly as well, right? Marginalized communities, they all need to be safeguarded. So what does that look like? And coming together in a stakeholder engagement to get this done, because it needs to be done. And the longer we wait, the more we lose.
Yeah.
The more we lose our culture and the more we lose people that we care about. To countries that have done this. Right?
Yeah.
Brain drain is real.
Yeah.
And the National Development Plan would encompass, how do we want our education system to look like? How do we want a fair society in Cayman to look like long term? It's a very multifaceted plan.
If you could give advice to your younger self, because my goal and hope is that younger individuals would also be listening to this and gaining some knowledge from this, and hopefully someone takes something positive away from this conversation. At some point, what would your advice be to your younger self?
Figure out what your values are. Really, really articulate them, right? Because it's one thing to have broad ups, right? But you really need to understand what it is that you value. Map it out and live by those values. Go to work, live by those values. When you're a consumer in the store, shop by those values. When you're advocating for policy, advocate for what you value. And it all just sort of comes together from there. So for me, I value a healthy and safe Cayman Islands. So when I go to the store, I try not to buy plastic, right? I'm a zero waste advisor. I don't like pollution, but I know I can't just not like pollution. I also participate in beach cleanups. And even if there isn't a beach cleanup, I'll pick up garbage, right? Like, I come here and clean up the park for fun some days, because I would rather see it clear and just the plants and not be distracted by a bottle, right? Or when you're in your profession, really, really looking and seeing, is this actually working in the direction I want it to? Or is this just putting profit over people and planet?
Right.
It's hard. It's hard to make that switch, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I left a solid job, career in the financial services industry that would have set me up for the rest of my life. But it was not something that I could wake up and be excited about anymore, when I realized that until systemic changes happened that were values aligned with what I value, with what most people value, which is our culture and our islands. I can't keep contributing to Cayman's demise in that way. Don't get me wrong, it has an immense economic benefit, but again, economic growth can't come at the cost of our communities and our environment. So using my powers for good, yeah, that's some advice I'd give to my younger self. Figure out what your powers are, figure out what your values are, and use them for good.
They're pretty solid values to move on, and definitely some advice I could have used when I was much younger, because I knew who I was, but at the same time I didn't always listen to my inner self and having not done that, I live with regrets. And the last thing as an older person is realizing that living with those regrets are some things that you're going to be trying to undo for the rest of your life. So I hope someone can appreciate that message. What is one thing that someone probably wouldn't expect or have learned about you before?
That's a good one. I really like to sing.
Okay.
Yeah. I wouldn't say I'm the best singer, but I love classical.
We all have a bathroom voice. Always sounds
Read
better than...
acoustics into my shower. I love classic rock. I love to sing, but kind of just come full circle with the conversation when it comes to, I consider myself a very values aligned, very values driven Verdant Islander, as I call it. I love the national song to the point where I actually got it tattooed on my body.
Okay.
And it compels me to do the work that I do, right? I was on a work trip in St. Martin, and the last night that we were there, me and my new colleagues who I met at the conference were like, does anybody want to go get tattoos? And we're like, yes, we want to go get tattoos. And I was the last in line, and I was hemming and hawing, what do I get? What do I get? Because I had this whole folder of ideas that I want to get tattoos of. And I was like, I'm homesick. And I was like, although I wander far, my heart enshrines thee yet. Homeland fair Cayman Isle, I will not thee forget. And I got a tattoo.
That's awesome.
And whenever I hear the national song, I will tear up because it is just such a beautifully written song by Miss Layla. And she put her heart into that.
Yeah.
And it was a song for our mariners, our seafarers to just, although they wandered far, their heart would enshrine Cayman. And people who are studying and living and working overseas, although you wander far, our hearts enshrine you yet. And it's a song that I love. Like, I wake up every morning and I sing it. Just because it's like, that's what we're doing today.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
And two facts I didn't think I would have known about you, because I think I recognized the tattoo when I first met you, but I didn't actually read it, obviously.
It's in my handwriting, so it's kind of, which isn't like chicken scratch or anything, but it is.
Yeah, that's a fact that someone wouldn't have known, though, and that's pretty cool. And that it shows, again, comes back to you being true to yourself, and one can always appreciate that. Any last messages before we wrap up and stop getting eaten by sandflies?
I would say, remember like where you are, right?
Yeah.
Like, I believe strongly that a Caymanian is both a noun and a verb. It's a title that you hold, but it's also something that you do. It's recognizing the resources around us and doing your part to ensure that they can keep going, because it's not just you, it's future generations. The same experiences that we had growing up, me fishing with my grandfather and learning to thatch from my great grandmother before her mind started to dwindle. Like, those are very fond memories I have. Learning to clean a conch from my grandfather is a memory that I still think about, and I've never done it since because it was pretty intense. But I was doing a cooking competition and I thought, I'm gonna make conch. Oh wait, my grandfather catches conch. Let me go. And he was like, yeah, no, I just caught some. Here's how you do it. And I'm like, how do you take this big thing and all this and all you get is this little...
Well, you're definitely doing your part and trying to serve Cayman and being a future leader and inspirer for people, you know. Thank you for your time, and thank you for this first shot at Fly on the Wall. Thank you. If you've made it this far, I want to give you a big thank you for listening and watching the entire video. It was an honor to have Emily DeCou as my first guest on Fly on the Wall. I hope to have some more episodes. They're going to be in a different format and the audio will be much better than what you have today. But nevertheless, it was fun to do. I had a lot of lessons learned, and stay tuned for the next one.